listen, there's a lot of people like that on all sides because, look, Trump never wants to look weak. But in the end, it's like what you're talking about. It's like you're always open and willing to learn. Like a lot of these people say that, but they don't live that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like I say the same thing, but I rarely actually come out and say it. But to me, listen, I'm not perfect. I've been wrong, and I'll be wrong again. It's not going to kill me.
Wrong. It's okay to be wrong.
It's not going to kill me. You know, and you learn shit. Like, listen, I had a little bit of hope when I saw some of this footage of like cops kneeling and shit, and then I hear stories about, 20 minutes later they were out with the tear gas, and I'm just like, you know what? I was wrong.
Yep.
It was nice to be hopeful for a minute, but you hope that behavior changes, and then it goes right back to the way it was, and it's like, all right, I had a little bit of hope thinking that maybe somebody would finally wise up, but no.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with my homegirl, Megan, and we both basically came to the same opinion at the exact same time, is that while all of this work and lip service is great, if nobody makes any true movement, and I'm not talking about people saying they're going to do work and maybe even changing a few rules. I'm talking about we need a leader from the minority faction to step up and assume the role of pushing these things forward.
Right.
Because otherwise, it will just slowly go back to where we were. There needs to be focus. Because right now it's great that there are, like, Philadelphia had 100,000 people show up to their protest march on Saturday, while there were 40,000 people in DC, and New York's been fucking going ham for the whole week. Like, all this shit is good. I'm not mad about it. I'm happy. I'm excited about the prospect of things changing. But there needs to be a coalescence of these ideas and an actual movement, and not just people out on the street protesting. Because what exactly are we protesting for?
Well, eventually he's going to get tired too. It's just going to be like, okay, what it's like walking around and driving around. Like, okay, where are we going?
Right. Like the civil rights movement had MLK. But it also had Malcolm X and the Black Panther movement, and like a number of organized factions moving different pieces into place to make it so that it was able to happen.
Right.
We don't have that right now. All we have is people arguing about Antifa.
Which is pointless.
White power people infiltrating and doing dirty deeds in the name of the Black Lives Matter movement, which is zero surprise. We have the Black Lives Matter movement, which is wholly unorganized. Yeah. So, like, what is the end game of this? Because defunding the police or even abolishing the police is kind of, I believe, a little too far. Now, underfunding or pulling back funds from the police and diverting those funds to positive change within neighborhoods and communities, that's a solid plan. Right. Because and I know that every inner city and just barely in the suburbs, but still minority prevalent neighborhoods have terrible schooling, have terrible policing policies, terrible job options, and terrible food options. Yeah. Like, what we need is money towards those things to try and even out the playing field. We need better teachers, and we need those teachers to be paid better. We need better books. We need music back in the school system. Like, there's 1,000 things that absolutely need to happen. And if we pulled some money out of policing budgets, and frankly, there's other places that we could pull the money from too. But if we're just talking the police budgets, there's no reason for them to have tanks. Like, the police shouldn't have tanks. There's no point in that.
No, but that's all. You know, that's one of the things that's been talked out for years. Just the whole idea of the militarization of police in general, which, you know, I mean, in New York, the community aspect of it is just completely lost at this point.
Yep.
No matter how hard they try to push otherwise, it's just lost. It's just not happening.
Well, I saw it somewhere, and they said that they've virtually turned the police officer into a social outreach agent with a gun, instead of just doing actual police work, which is, you know, monitoring traffic, not writing thousands and thousands of tickets. Just monitor your traffic and follow up on actual crime. That's it. Everything else is probably outside of what they should be truly handling.
I mean, they don't, you know, the problem with New York is that there's always been this talk about quotas and stuff like that.
Right.
And that's, you know, no matter how much they deny it, you know, there have been guys with hidden recorders in morning meetings at the precinct documenting this stuff, and then they'll still deny it. But that's like all these other guys that, you know, like today, I don't know if you heard, they said that there's no chemical in pepper balls.
Bullshit.
like Anderson Cooper's on CNN saying this, and he just stops and makes a face and is just like, and it's
right.
Like, you know, but this is what we deal with. It's like what I said about the whole war on common sense. It's just like, who's buying that?
Idiots.
Yeah.
And the problem is there's a glut of idiots in the world.
Well, that's certainly true. But in the end, the other part of it also is they're going to say it, and their attitude is like, well, what are you going to do about it? And that's why people are out on the street every day.
Yep.
You know, because it's not just, yeah, the police do it, but the government does it. And I mean, there's just so much bullshit coming out every single day. It's like you're not even trying to be on the level with people.
It's an unending flow of just complete horseshit.
Yeah, it's a joke. It's a joke, and it's just like, you know, how long are we going to go with this bullshit?
It's going to be a while. I mean, I hate to go back to this argument, but we've been in this situation, knowingly or unknowingly, for, I'm going to call it, about 100 years.
Right.
And I'm not even just talking about police brutality. I'm just talking about the situation of our current world is almost unchanged over the course of the last 100 years. Sure, it's gotten incrementally better, but if you look at it, it's the same.
Yeah.
Like, there's no the progress is made by the people, not by the government. Like, we as a people may be progressing, but everything around us is stuck.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And listen, it's going to stay that way because, look, all this stuff is going on now with the police, and who's the biggest problem? The police unions.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to change what they're doing. They want to do things their way, and they're going to sit there and dig their heels in and fight it tooth and nail. And it's like, you know what? Like, get with the program.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is that they have juice within government, and that's where the real battle is going to be.
So
at some point, one of these politicians is going to have to be like, I can't keep doing this. Like, I I can't keep holding your hand anymore. And I'm going to have to cut you loose. But
it's going to take a while.
It's not going to be that easy. But that's the only way there's going to be any real progress in this thing, because those guys, look at the Buffalo thing. It's all on camera.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
Yeah. It's all on camera, and the shit goes down, and then everybody, like the whole emergency response team resigns from the team.
Right.
In protest. It's like,
one of the things I want to clear up about that for the people who may be listening is that every time I see it online, everybody's talking about how they quit being a police officer. Stop it. Read the actual fucking report. Stop just reading headlines. Read the whole fucking thing so you are at least as informed as you possibly can be. They quit the special task force that was out on the street. They are still police officers roaming the streets doing what they do. They just aren't out there doing this special task force.
It's like being on a special group at work. You're part of some special group, and it's like you leave the group, you still go back to your regular job. So they're cops. They're not. It's not like they resigned and were like, well, I don't want to be a cop anymore. There's really very little risk. I don't know if there was even a pay difference involved there or not, but
probably not, or some minuscule amount extra.
Even if it is, it was enough that they were just like, well, fuck it,
right?
You know, and there's really no other penalty. Like if there was a pay hike, that's really it. So these guys say that that's okay. They say it's okay to leave a 75-year-old man bleeding from his head and walk past him and not offer any assistance whatsoever. And then
the one person who does attempt to give assistance gets pulled away.
Exactly. And then they say that that's okay, and they're still on the force. Like, that's kind of a problem.
I'm going to call it more than kind of a problem.
Well, yeah.
But, I mean, what kind of animal do you need to be to see an unarmed 75-plus-year-old man walking at you, probably yelling something about peace, and you just push him out of the way? Why couldn't you just walk around him? It wouldn't have taken but a sidestep. I don't care if you're walking in formation. There's no reason to injure that man. It's bullshit.
Here's where we get into the classic response. Where have you heard this before? I was following orders. Well, so were the SS soldiers. They were just following orders.
Exactly.
But that's where all this stuff comes down to. But it's funny because it's that same trend, like we talked about with Trump blaming everybody. Everybody's blaming everybody. It's like, I'm not responsible for my actions. I was just following orders. So it's like suddenly the accountability, it's just passing the buck on the accountability. And at some point, you know what? Have some balls and take some responsibility for your own actions.
Yeah, good luck with that.
But that's the whole. But this is the root of the problem.
I mean, that's 100% the problem.
Right. And that's what nobody wants to do. And that's, and it goes everywhere. And it all goes back to what I was saying last week. It's the same thing about the war on common sense. It's about breeding robots. These are all things that are ingrained. Like Trump, from the time he came in, he kept blaming Obama for shit and blaming the old administration, this and that. And that was, he set the table that way.
Well, so he's doing the long play.
Every time something happens, yeah. Well, listen, he did it with the governors too, because with the whole COVID thing, he leaves it in the hands of the governors. Why does he leave it in the hands of the governors? Because then when it goes to shit, he could say, oh, well, it was the governors. It wasn't me.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. The long play shitting on Obama started back in, what was it? 08?
Well,
no. When did Obama go in? 08. So
yeah.
So it started in 07, 08. Like a full-on long play. He started just shitting on my man with the birther movement.
Right.
And it has just continued. I mean, we're moving in on, what is it, like 13 or 14 years of him blaming Obama for everything.
Well, but that was the Republican thing too, because
Sure.
You know, I mentioned it. I think I mentioned it last week. You know, here we are with everything is Obama. They tried to repeal Obamacare how many times? Everything was his fault. And like I got into last week, Obama went in and it was all based on this whole big hope thing. And it's like the guy was just set up no matter what he did. Yeah, and I said it when he got elected. No matter what he did, he couldn't undo. There's problems going in the government that go back to the Reagan and Carter years.
Yep.
And he's not gonna. He goes in 2009. He's not gonna undo, 30 years of shit.
Of just trash.
No matter, he could go in shining, and do everything perfect, and there's no way that he could undo all that was done over 30 years. So when they started talking all that hope shit, I immediately felt bad for the dude, because I was like, besides the fact that he was already going to be a target because he was the first black president and people were going to set him up to fail that way.
Yep.
Just to say, well, look, now we put a black man there. Look at what he did.
Yep, that's exactly where we're at now.
Right.
You had your 8 years of black president, and what did we get?
Yeah. But that's their whole revisionist thing, because you know what? Yeah, he did some good stuff. He did, and don't get me wrong, he did plenty of stuff that I had issues with too.
Yep.
It's not like I'm, I'm not a huge fan of any politicians really, because for the most part, just about all of them have some real issues, and the whole, just like we talk about cops, it's not cops, it's a system.
Yep.
Politicians, it's the same thing. It's not the politician, it's the system. This whole two-party system is a joke, and it causes a lot more problems than it does good. So it's the same kind of thing. It's just the whole system is flawed.
Yeah, I've mentioned before, if you really go back and look at history, the last president that I feel like can look at his time in office and not feel like he wholesale made major issues is Carter. But Carter's problem is that he had no balls.
Right.
So he got run over come re-election time.
Mm-hmm.
But in my opinion, he was a generally good human being, and he's continued to be such since leaving office.
Yes.
So I don't have a problem with him, but there were still problems. There are problems going back to Nixon.
Yeah.
And beyond that, for that matter. It's a problematic position to be in, quote unquote, leader of the free world.
Of course.
You're never going to make all the best decisions, but the war on drugs started with Richard Nixon.
Right.
and devolved into like the crazy war on drugs under Reagan, and then Bush, and then you got the Clinton years where even the Democrats went ham on crime. And it's just so many years of trash policy can't be undone with the flick of a switch.
Exactly. But that's the story of government in general, because no matter what you talk about, whether it's the war on drugs, all this current race stuff, a lot of these things were bubbling for years before they finally came to the surface.
Yep.
And there's no real solution for any of these things.
Yeah, and we talked about it last week, but you got to think that these people that are politicians now, that are in office right now, they had parents who were truly racist beings, and they grew up with those people as their parents. You know what I mean? It was ingrained in them at home.
Right.
And when you learn these things, unless you choose and fight to overcome it, you will just repeat that pattern.
Right. There's a certain level of awareness that has to be there before you can really start to turn some of this stuff around.
Like, I have great hope that there are more people who are more open to change around now and younger now, but there's still an assload of true shitheads, and they've been rearing their heads on the internet for the last month, we'll call it.
Yeah.
But they've always been there, but they just have been quiet. Now they're not quiet at all.
Well, because they feel empowered. It's like you had going when Obama was in president, how many times were people throwing racial shit around on Twitter or whatever?
I mean,
and
it had just stopped.
Yeah. But it's just like, it's gotten worse now because the people that didn't feel bold enough to do it before now feel bold because of the president. And they're just throwing the N-word around and throwing all this shit around. But they're also the first ones to cry when it goes public and they get shamed. Yep. And then they lose a scholarship or something.
Or lose a job.
Yeah. And it's like, this shouldn't ruin my life. It's like...
well, you kind of ruined your own life, pal.
Yeah, like, why the fuck not? Like, what...
Like, we as a society
are... pass?
We as a society need to decide that this is no longer an acceptable piece of society and it needs to be eradicated. But the only way it can be eradicated is if we make it unwanted. And sure, even if it's done and everybody goes along with it, it's going to take time and there will still be residual. You're never going to get rid of all of it. It's just not possible. But if we want to get rid of it in a meaningful way, we need to get it out of the policies of the people who police us and who pass laws against us and who hold our future in charge. Like
right.
That's where you make the difference. You're not going to make the same difference just getting rid of it in quote unquote regular population, and it would be completely impossible to do.
No, but to make that change, and like I said before, and I could give you plenty of examples of this. And listen, don't get me wrong. I'm not a cop. I'm not a politician. I'm not. I'm just a regular guy with a regular job. But there are so many things that are obviously just systematic issues that need to be addressed and need to be fixed because it's just not working. I'll give you a perfect example because I brought this up in the past, not with you. I think cops in general are too quick to reach for the gun.
Of course.
And this has been proven, and it's not just a race thing, because one of the examples that I always use is a cop goes to an apartment in Washington Heights. This was years ago. Woman opens the door. She called the cops. I don't remember what it was, whether it was a noise complaint or what the detail of it was. She opens her door a bit. Dog goes running out. Friendly dog. Dogs wagging tail. They got it all on camera. Cop shoots dog. What the fuck?
Right.
Like, dog comes up to you wagging the tail and your first instinct is to reach for the gun? Like, that's not somebody that should be a cop.
Well, the problem
is... Or at the very least, it's somebody that should be retrained because obviously they're
you have no idea of risk assessment.
No.
And that's that is one of my biggest issues, is that too many cops are ill-equipped to deal with the situations in which they are presented with. Right. Either via the fact that they have bad training, or they've had such bad experiences with people in the public in their regular lives before being a cop or while being a cop that they have lost the ability to reason with the information that is presented to them.
Right.
Also, as stated many times by others, they don't see certain things as worthy of life. So it's easy to pull the trigger because a lot of these guys don't pull the trigger on rich people.
Right.
I mean, you could see a rich guy wilding out. Or you could see even a reasonably affluent white guy wilding out on his property, off his property, and they will treat him with kid gloves.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, they broke into that dude's house, shot his girlfriend while she's sleeping, basically, or she got up, and they tried to put him in jail for shooting back on a no-knock warrant. Like,
right.
Like, why are you serving a no-knock warrant? And I know I'm jumping back and forth, but, it's the policies in which they operate in that make it so that these people with lack of training and a lack of risk assessment, and honestly, they're just plain scared.
Exactly.
Like, I don't think that when you hear an officer that says, I was scared for my life, like, in most cases, even if they don't look it in, like, the video, they were actually scared for their life, and it's because they have inherent fear built into them.
Right.
It's just part of how they now operate. Everybody is a target or a threat. And that you can't have safety police and have what we have now. They can't both be the same thing.
No,
so,
absolutely not.
There needs to be some kind of reckoning in either retraining, better testing. Like, if I want to be an engineer, I got to go to school. And then once I get out of school, I still got to apprentice. And then I got to pass a test that proves. And I mean, it would take me a long time to become an engineer. And I also have to then get licensed and insured as an engineer if I'm going to build something, so that if it fails, I'm covered.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, these officers are out here just, basically straight out of high school or college, depending, with no real experience. And there's no repercussion for bad decisions. It's just not working.
No, because but that's, and listen, am I equating, dealing with a minority to dealing with a dog? No. And
but
what I'm doing is I'm equating a poor reaction to another poor reaction, and that's the real problem. Because, listen, I used to work as a security guard, and one of the things you learn when you take the security classes that you have to get your security guard license, just like you were talking about with being an engineer, you learn in the security guard class to de-escalate the situation.
Right.
And no, I wasn't an armed guard, but the first thing, and listen, what was I doing? I was working like music venues and bars and shit like that. And could I just go and start throwing somebody out right away? Sure. But does that help anything? No. You learn to de-escalate the situation. It's basics. So how are you going to de-escalate the situation if you got a dog coming up wagging the tail and you reach for your gun? What are you going to do when you're handling something with a human who's got a lot more subtleties, a lot more little things that you should be looking for? But why aren't you reaching? If you're going to reach for something, why aren't you reaching for your taser first, at the very least? If you reach for anything at all. And I understand these guys are at risk, like, there's all kinds of crazy people doing all kinds of crazy shit. But, just like you said, there's a risk assessment that has to go in on the spot. And obviously the system is flawed. And that goes not just from dealing with, dogs or whatever, but it goes for dealing with different types of people, whether they're minorities or or whether they're fucking high or drunk or whatever, there's a risk assessment involved, just like you said.
There's the New York City budget for cops is apparently about $6 billion a year. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. Now, I believe if you decide that you're going to do as they said, which is reappropriate funds. Let's not call it defund the police, because that's just not what it's an accurate word.
I think a lot of people read that very wrong.
Right. It's about changing how the funding goes. But let's just say you're going to reappropriate funds. Are you telling me that a lot of these people that the cops come in the hand-to-hand combat with are mentally ill? They're on drugs. They're selling drugs. I mean, like, there's a lot around things that could be actually fought by providing treatment, by providing housing, by providing jobs. I mean, like, there are ways that you could reappropriate these funds that would bring the amount of hand-to-hand way down. But
absolutely,
nobody wants to have that actual conversation. They never want to talk about that. It's always just put more feet on the ground. Pressure, pressure, pressure. And we've gotten to the point now where that just doesn't work.
Well, not to spin this into a different conversation, I'll just throw this in there and then you can continue. A big part of a lot of the problems that we have in this country right now are just putting our heads in the sand when it comes to mental illness. You know, we're quick to blame.
I don't think that's a side note or a vector we shouldn't go down. And you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I don't want to sidetrack you off where you're going, and that's
I'm already there.
Yeah, because a lot of times we're quick to blame guns or blame this or blame that, and there's certainly a role for all that stuff. But I think the big question that nobody wants to tackle, that's come up a little bit, but not nearly enough, and it relates to this, just like you're talking about, is mental illness. Because sure, you could talk about de-escalating a situation, and just like you said, you can approach somebody and they might have a serious mental illness.
Absolutely.
And what good is pulling the gun out going to do?
It's just going to make it worse.
Right. But this is what I'm talking about. It's the same. It's the same thing when you talk about a risk assessment. There are certain things involved, and there are different ways to handle certain situations. And this is a situation that comes up a lot. There's a lot of mentally ill people in this country. And some of them might do something small, and some of them might go and shoot up a fucking movie theater.
Yep.
But,
my problem is how they handled the two differences.
Right.
Also, because we've seen time and time again where if the shooters don't kill themselves, the police have no problem with bringing them in, for the most part, unscathed. But my man on the corner who's having a mental health break and clearly needs just help. He needs a safe bed and a place to come down from that moment of serious mental break, gets shot. Yeah. It's a problem, and nobody is willing to talk about it. So, to get back towards my tangent, but not pull away from this, where I'm going to go with this is mildly controversial, but I think it's true, at least in my opinion, as a black person who's grown up in America. Black people are not living in post-traumatic stress disorder. They're living in stress disorder because they're, as I've said before, they're living in situations where there are no schools, well, at least no good schooling. there's no jobs, and they live in food deserts, and they don't know where their money is coming from. So they're out there doing things to provide, to feel like they're actually being productive and making money, and they're doing it the best way that they know how, because they haven't had any options otherwise. And if you argue that they could have just done better in school, if you knew the war zone of these inner city schools, you would never say that, because you know you wouldn't send your kid to those schools. As soon as like the school starts to deteriorate in any way, all the white people, you have white flight from that school system. They're gone. You move out of the town and let it crumble. So it's bullshit. It's true. So if you want to deal with it, you need to deal with the mental health issue, and you need to deal with the inner cities. You have to. Otherwise, it's just going to continue to be as bad as it is and get worse.
I don't disagree with you at all, and I think it's a complex problem, and I don't know if there's an easy solution for it, because I see, the schools have always been a problem. I'm lucky, my neighborhood, my area, the schools are decent. Because I have friends who have their kids, white kids, in public school, and no problems.
Right.
My kids went to a charter school, but I've heard nothing bad about the local schools here, and I'm in the Bronx. Other parts of the Bronx, obviously, it's a different story. And I've heard many, many stories about terrible things. I had an ex-girlfriend of mine that used to teach in Washington Heights, and after a year she quit, and it wasn't even the kids, it was the politics involved in the school, because they basically wanted to just pass everybody,
right,
which was an issue in itself. Yeah, they wanted to just put them through, because otherwise then they might close the school or do something with the school. Like that whole system, just like we're talking about with all these other systems, that whole system is broken too. And you could blame it on multiple people, because there's been a couple of different mayors that have tried to do different things with it, and none of them have worked. And, truth is also some of it might fall in the hands of parents as well, because I know there are some parents who really don't.
They don't care. They're not paying attention.
Yeah, they're not paying attention at all to what's going on. And in some cases, you've got, kids that are just a couple of generations down of just neglect.
But that goes back to mental health. Exactly.
Because there's no resources for those kids either. And there's no help. There's nothing for those kids. Those kids are just kind of on their own. But, we keep getting controversial, because to me, I think there are some people who really should not have children. And that's a whole other avenue
that's
to go down.
a whole other avenue.
Yeah.
But I don't disagree with you that there are parents out there that are not model parents, and they're doing their children a disservice by not allowing them to be with a family that would actually care for them. And that's my personal opinion on children that are neglected in general, whether it's from a schooling standpoint or just a nurturing standpoint, food, the whole deal. Like, if you aren't able to take care of your children in a way that is at least reasonable, you're doing your child a disservice, and then as well, you're doing the general public a disservice, because we're the ones that have to deal with him later.
See, but that goes back to what I was saying before about people not being self-aware and not, putting it in perspective and blaming everybody else. Everybody really, and it's an ideal, and of course I know it's probably never going to be reality, but everybody really should, accept that they've got a part in this whole machine, and that if you have a kid, that's a certain responsibility, not just to yourself, but to the kids and to the whole community. And I'm not on some whole it takes a village bullshit, but it's all part, all these things all work together. And
if you allow yourself to raise a shithead, then we all have to deal with that shithead.
We all have to deal with that shithead. And, everybody likes to blame the system and blame this and blame that. And yeah, there's obstacles, just like with all the stuff we're talking about with just the problems of living in the city and the lack of resources and stuff like that. But also there's other responsibility too, and you got to accept some of that responsibility. And because I see a lot of parents, my kids were in school with kids whose parents just didn't give a shit.
Well, it's kids having kids, man.
Yeah, that's part of the issue.
Is the kid the average age of the parent has gone down to a number that falls into an area where you are not even prepared to do the things that you need to do to be responsible for another human being.
Right.
And I'm not telling people that they shouldn't do what they want to do, but you got to understand that if you get yourself into a situation where you have a child, that changes your personal life trajectory. And if you're not willing to step up and do the right things, as hard as it may be, to allow your child to go to someone who will actually care for them, that should be the most important thing, in my opinion. But controversial, because
to me, I think, but it goes into the whole thing also of sex education, and
there is none.
What you teach kids. Well, there is none because people are so resistant to it.
Yep.
And it boggles my mind sometimes, but I at the same time, on one side I could see, well, you leave it up to the parents, but then you're talking about bad parents, so it's like, where does it go? To me, I'll just put it straight up, because listen, my kids are old enough now. If your kids are old enough to be shooting live rounds, if you know what I mean,
you gotta have the talk.
You gotta have that talk, because you know what? The last thing I need is my 14, 15-year-old son coming to me like, I just got this girl pregnant.
Right.
Because then at 14, 15,
that's your kid to deal with.
That kid's fucked.
That's your kid to deal with, basically.
That kid's fucked. And I'm not even talking about the unborn kid. I'm talking about my kid.
Yeah, your kid.
Fucked.
But I'm saying that next kid down the line is your kid to deal with, because your son will not be prepared
he's not
in any way to actually take care of this child.
But that's exactly what I'm talking about. And it's crazy, when my kids got to be that age, I put a lot of thought into it, and I said, that's what I have to do.
Yep.
And I have to do it for me. I have to do it for him. I have to do it because, just like we said, it's not good for those kids either. That kid is born, and God knows we've all seen enough of them. These kids are just born, and it's kids having kids, and you have no idea. These kids are lost. Mm-hmm. And when you get down 3 generations of lost, that's what I was talking about before. It's like that shit just rolls downstream. That shit just, drifts downstream. And once you get to like the 3rd generation of that, you've got more and more problems down the line.
It's like the entry scene of, as we talk about every week, of Idiocracy. Just breeding and breeding and breeding with and then it's just making dumber and dumber people who make worse and worse decisions. I'm going to leave names out, but when I was in high school-ish, we were actually in junior high, a class member was pregnant at 12.
Wow.
Had the kid. The kid had his first kid before the mother had her second kid.
Jesus Christ.
So his brother is younger than his daughter.
Wow.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
So,
and I mean, listen, there's a whole other side of it too when it comes to kids, because a lot of people don't understand the responsibilities of it. Just financially, having kids is a ruiner. It's a ruiner. If you're not making a decent amount of money, maybe it's different if you live in other parts of the country, but I can tell you, living in New York City,
living in New Jersey,
and I was going to say, you living in New Jersey, which basically is the New York area, you living around here with kids, even under the best circumstances, talking about like the kids are living with you, it's not child support, it's not one of those type of situations. Even under the best circumstances, that shit is a killer. That shit is a killer. And I'm talking about basic living. If you want to get into something like taking the kids to Disney World or some shit, then
anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't even talk then Disney. You want to go to the shore, it's going to cost you.
Yeah.
It's going to cost you.
It's dangerous. And there's no way around it.
Yep.
Yeah, and even just basic living is just a tremendous amount of money. But when you get to trying to do anything fun, especially if you have more than one kid, you want to do anything that's any kind of fun, you're talking about a major amount of money.
You're talking a real investment.
And like I said, that's under the best circumstances. I don't need to get into my own stuff.
Yeah.
But if you start getting into things like paying child support or separating time and co-parenting and things like that, there's so much more involved there. And once again, even if it's the best possible situation, it's a tremendous amount of work. And it's a tremendous expense. And the last thing you need is to be, in high school and have to deal with any of this shit. And it's a dangerous, dangerous game. And like I said, if your kid is old enough to be shooting live rounds,
you need to be having that contact.
It's something you got to have that, because if you don't have that conversation, they're going to learn about it the hard way.
Yep.
And that's the last thing you need, because once
they're not going to learn it on Pornhub. They're not learning it on Pornhub.
And once that seed is planted, you can't unplant that seed.
I mean, technically you could, but that's a totally different conversation.
That's a totally different conversation, but also that's a conversation that has to be agreed upon.
Right. That's not just a one-sided.
It's not just in your hands. You don't have control over that conversation. You could sit there and say, let's go take care of that all day. And if somebody doesn't want to, then it's not going to happen. And there's nothing you can do about it. That's just how it is. But that, this is all other things that people need to wrap their heads around.
And they never do.
No.
Never do.
But these things all carry down, and like we said, talking about living in the city and the different things you have to deal with, this is one of them. And there's no way around it.
So let me ask you this. Is the city wild right now still?
I wouldn't say it's wild. I mean, I'll say I'm lucky because where I am, things have been pretty quiet. Mm-hmm. My neighborhood is a little weird because it's a middle-class neighborhood. There's a lot of old Italians that live around here. And I'm in a few Facebook groups, for the local area here, for my neighborhood and stuff like that. And a lot of them are Trump people.
Rough.
And a lot of them are obviously, they're anti-Black Lives Matter. They're anti, so I don't really interact with these people too much, but that's kind of the mentality there. And they're very resistant to anything. Like, I see them talking about, like, you know, somebody goes on there, like, there's a lot of all lives matter flying around. You know what I mean?
It's so painful. That whole thing is painful to me.
Yeah. But it's all just online. Like, I don't really interact with any of these people, like I said. Like, you know, I interact with some people on the block, and everybody's chill, but you know how it is. You never know until there's a spot where they have to show their true colors.
Mm-hmm.
So, and like I said, I'm basically a white guy, so, like, I don't really, you know, I don't know how they would react if I was a different color. But
because you don't have that, it's just not.
But yeah. I think overall, the vibe in the city right now is kind of quiet but tense. There's been protests every day downtown, and it's kind of gone up and down because de Blasio decided that he wanted to show out and be a tough guy for a couple of days. Yeah, and then all of a sudden the cops were being dicks. And then the cops kind of chilled out because all of a sudden Cuomo was knocking it. And in the end, de Blasio is a fence rider, and he can't pick a side.
Now, aren't de Blasio's kids black?
Yes. He's married to a black woman. He's got 2 children that are half black.
Right.
And one of them, the one that got arrested, actually, she's a punk rocker. She once had de Blasio introduce the Bad Brains on stage, I think.
Huh.
And, like, I think it might have been one of those Afro punk shows.
Right.
But yeah, she's a punk rocker, and she's into, you know, the protests and stuff like that. She was arrested at a protest, and of course, you know, he was asked about it. Yeah. But, you know, he's a fence rider in a sense because, you know, people straight up called him out recently, telling him to stop hiding behind his black wife. And that's because his wife has also been wrapped up in sketchy business. I don't remember all the details of it, so I don't want to give misinformation, but I believe she may have been involved in a nonprofit or something like that.
That was she was on the take.
Yeah, a bunch of money disappeared, so it didn't look good, and it looked especially bad because it was the mayor's wife.
I mean, we all know how that works around here, though.
Well, yeah, that's stuff happens.
A president that has defrauded people multiple times. So the idea that somebody in some range of power defrauded other people is not completely outside of the realm of truth or possibility.
But you know, overall, you know, there's things like that. I think the protests have been chill. There hasn't really been, you know, that first night or two you had the crazy looting, but then even though everybody focuses on that, I don't think there's really been, like, there's been very few instances of it.
It was nowhere near as bad as the people cried about it actually being.
I mean, I can tell you there were a couple of neighborhoods where it was bad. Fordham Road got hit bad. Burnside Avenue got hit bad.
I'm talking in the grand scheme of how much stuff we have in America.
No. You would think, from the way they talk and from the way the president talks, you would think the whole damn city was on fire.
Right.
Which it wasn't like that. Fordham Road, they hit a bunch of stores. They were looting shit. There's video of a couple of kids smacking up a cop. There's another video of kids just running out of a sneaker store while 2 cops just stand there watching them, which is a whole other issue.
There's pictures and videos of Philadelphia, and it's mostly white kids looting the fucking stores.
Right.
Like, I'm not saying one kid or another type of kid matters, but the media would have you believe that it's legitimately only black people out committing these crimes, and it's just not true.
No, I mean, but there's different ways to look at it. the videos that I saw from the Bronx, it looked like it was mostly Hispanic hood rat kids.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that's the Bronx. And what are they hitting? They're hitting sneaker stores. They're hitting liquor stores. They're going shopping basically and taking advantage of the stupid situation. But in a lot of other places, there was a lot of white people looting. If you go with your conspiracy theory people, it was white supremacists trying to make it look bad and instigate the whole thing. It was probably believe that to be the case? Maybe not. I don't know.
I think it was probably a little bit of all of it.
That would be my assessment because I really don't know.
I wasn't there.
But there's all kinds of crazy stuff that's been talked about, like these mysterious pallets of bricks that appear where protests are supposed to be and shit like that. Like, I don't know how true all that stuff is.
I don't know how true it is either.
I don't really put a lot of thought into it because at this point, there's so much that goes on, and it seems like everybody has an agenda to work somebody else, and these pictures go on the internet and then get proven false. And I just, like, I don't know.
Are we living in a sim?
For now, it's quiet. I don't know how long it's going to last that way.
Right. I was making a joke, but do you think we're living in a sim and it just somebody misprogrammed something? Like, there's just, it just feels like,
somebody hit
2020.
The chaos button.
Somebody fucked up, and when they changed all the issues for year Y2K, they just pushed it out 20 years, and then this is what we get now.
See, this is what I think. I think somebody was playing a game on their computer and built up all this stuff, just like SimCity or whatever, and then they left it and decided to let their 4-year-old play with it for a while.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it feels like.
That's what I think happened. And their 4-year-old just was like, oh, this button says bomb, boom, and just blew everything to pieces.
Yeah.
There's no other explanation for how crazy things are right now. But like I said, like we've always said, a lot of these things have built up for so many years that can you really be totally surprised?
I'm not surprised. The thing I'm most surprised about is how many things have gone wrong in 2020. Not just the things in a singular sense, but just the sheer amount of things that have just went completely haywire. I started 2020 and everything was normal. And now nothing is normal. Nothing. I mean, I barely left my house for the last 12 weeks. I go to the grocery store, I go to my parents' house, and that's pretty much it. I've had one friend over to watch UFC, and we sat in the backyard 6 feet apart with a TV on the patio.
Yeah.
Until 1 o'clock in the morning. Otherwise, I'm not seeing people. I'm not playing any music. I'm not doing anything that would be considered a typical day, weekend, anything. So, yeah, I mean, 2020 is literally some wild shit.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I barely have left the house. I've done a handful of things, and that's really it. Like, for the most part, like the groceries and stuff like that, like, my friend upstairs will get stuff delivered and I'll jump in on that order or something, or, my girlfriend will come over and she'll bring stuff with her. But, and here I am doing random jobs, random projects for work until we get back into the swing of things. Who knows when that will be.
Right.
And it's just the whole thing is just bizarre. It's like everything's kind of stopped. But now, with all these protests and stuff, suddenly everybody's out again. And I'm waiting to see if a new outbreak happens or not.
Well, we were talking about it last week. I'm waiting for Outbreak 1A or 2A, whatever you want to call it, because Outbreak 2 isn't scheduled until September, October, around this upcoming flu season that's supposed to be wild. So,
but there's a scary thing. Like, what if another outbreak doesn't happen?
Then
like that's almost more scary than if it does. Like,
right.
Then we have no idea what we're dealing with.
Yep.
Because all these scientists are saying that it's going to get bad, it's going to get bad, everybody's exposed, this and this and that. And if it doesn't happen, then what the hell is going on?
Well, so I saw today while I was, I need to be clear. I pulled myself off the internet for the day. I haven't really paid attention to anything since Friday, for that matter. Saturday, I took a drive to Pittsburgh. That was the first time I had left my house for more than an hour in 3 full months.
Wow.
Drove to Pittsburgh and back for reasons I will not disclose right now. But I went to Pittsburgh and I came back. So I really wasn't on the internet on Saturday. Yesterday, I had some recording work to do at the studio, and then I just had some stuff to do around my house, and then I went to bed early. I really wasn't on the internet. Today, I'd spent almost zero time on it all day. The only thing I did was watch Netflix. I just took a couple days off to pull myself out of the cycle of, because basically I didn't sleep last week. Like, every night I went to bed, and I would just lay there with my thoughts of just how fucked up shit is, and I could not go to sleep. It would be 3, 4 o'clock. The birds would start chirping. It's 5:15, and I'm back awake again. And I needed to just detach a little bit so that not that I didn't want it all to be real, but I needed to mute it a little bit in my brain. So,
yeah, I get it.
Today, after we talked and you mentioned what I'm going to get to in a few moments, but I ventured back onto the internet to find that they're blaming cases in PA on kids going to the Jersey Shore over the weekend. It's Monday. All notation about this virus says 2 to 14 days. It's 1 day. And you're already saying that this is because of going to the Jersey Shore. How are you not sure that this has to do with them hanging out with somebody before they went to the Jersey Shore a week ago? Like, can we get some decorum around how you report anything? And then as well, let's let this all play out. We're talking this one person may have infected 12 people, they think. We're now at the point where we're reporting on 12 infections. We're not reporting on hundreds of infections. So are you just keeping us in fear because of a small number of infections? Or have we flattened this curve and these are the small numbers now? Like, I want to know where we're at, because there's no fucking clear information on where are we. And like, I'm tired of being stuck in the house, but I will willfully sit in the house if you tell me that it will keep me safe. I'm all about personal safety. And if you're telling me that it's dangerous out there, I will stay home. But I don't necessarily like staying home. So if it's not the danger that it once was, or you've figured out that if you have a level of health risk, then stay home and everybody else can be out and about, that's also fine. And I will determine my health status and make a decision for my personal well-being. But we need some more information.
I mean, that's all part of this whole thing, because it's just, I don't know anymore, because now everybody's been told that they got to stay home and do this, do that, and we're sitting here waiting, and nobody really knows, and everybody's waiting for this next wave. And that's why I said, what if it never comes? Because I'm not one of these conspiracy theory people that, oh, this is all made up and this and that. But I can see that things are starting to get a little weird, and we don't necessarily have all this information about when the next outbreak is coming and this and that. And I'm skeptical of the whole thing. I'm not going to start, throwing things around or whatever in different directions, but I'm just kind of sitting back and watching and waiting to see where things go. Because if there isn't another outbreak, then what does that mean? Does that mean that we were given misinformation? Does that mean that something changed?
Right.
What does it mean? And I like we talked about last week, I'm a firm believer in science. I want science to win this thing. I want these guys who are the scientists working for the government to be right. I want it to be that they're giving us correct information. I don't want to think that they're working us or whatever. But as this goes on, you ask these questions and you start to wonder, are these guys correct? Are these guys giving us the right information? And
it's hard to know.
And you don't really know. And it's like Trump seems to be wrong with so many things, but then he's knocking these dudes. And it's like, well, what if Trump is right about these guys? And that, that can create a whole other level of chaos to this. And that's one of the things that I worry about. But just in general, what if that's not, what if it's not what we thought it was? What if there isn't a second outbreak? What if all these people are out there protesting and they're all fine?
Right.
What does that mean?
And there's not one new infection from it.
Exactly.
Or if there is, there's of the hundreds of thousands of people, there's like 10 infections, like some small number. Then
right.
You go, well, where does our risk factor lie?
Right, because I don't want to sit there and say, oh, well, they set up this whole thing just to have us live in fear and this and that, which is what I hear some people say, and I'm just kind of like, But I am starting to have doubts and concerns.
My biggest concern comes down to the true loss, as we discussed last week, over the course of the next 6 months of all the small businesses. And we get down to, welcome to Costco, I love you. Because at some point, the rubber meets the road, and these people have been digging in their pockets for now 3 months of being shut down to cover the rent, whatever electrical costs are incurred to keep a store from being too hot, too cold, to this, to that, security, etc. There's cost involved in running a place, regardless of whether you're there or not. So, we've got these people paying and paying and paying and making next to nothing, especially if they run a business that does not have an internet presence, which that's a totally different conversation to have on a totally different night about what you should have been doing all along to prepare for something like this, or just the fact that things are changing in general. But regardless, you have these businesses out there. So 6 months from now, whether we open today or we open in 6 months, in 6 months, most of these businesses will be gone because they will have already eaten up any of their savings. They're not going to be able to open to capacity no matter what it is. people aren't going to come back out shopping immediately. There'll be some, but not. It's not going to be everybody back out in droves, because there is a certain section of people who are genuinely scared of incurring this disease or virus or whatever you want to call it. So these companies are not going to survive. So then it leads guys like Jeff Bezos and other big box stores that were able to weather this storm by providing direct delivery, utilizing UPS and FedEx and not the US Postal Service to get the things to your doorstep, or their own delivery service at that point. Like if you're talking about Amazon, I mean, they're literally paying their workers to drive the boxes to your house on their way home. Like they are subverting the way that things have occurred traditionally. And hey, great for Jeff Bezos. He's making tons and tons of money. It would be great if he was kicking it back to some of us, but I get it. You figured it out. You won the game. I can't knock him for winning the game. If it was me, I would do the same thing, but I probably would give more back. But what does that do in 6 months' time? Because you're going to have, as I mentioned last week, a glut of commercial property that nobody is going to be able to even take up. So then those people are going to start to fail on their monetary expenses because they're not going to be able to pay their loans to the banks. So then we're going to have those forfeitures. I mean, there's just an endless cycle of loss that is going to loom from this economic crisis that really hasn't even hit yet.
Well, yeah, because I think the worst is yet to come.
Yep.
I think that everybody is being sold on this idea of, oh, we got to reopen up our economy and this and that. And I think the part, a lot of people are seeing that thinking that this is going to solve the problem, and it's not. Because the reality is, I think for a lot of small businesses, they think that this is going to solve their problem, and it's not. Because once they open, there's not going to be the business that they're hoping for.
Yep.
Because there's still a lot of people out there who are out of work. There are still a lot of people who don't have that extra income. So they might buy food, but they're not going to have money to go and buy all this other stuff. They're still running on a shoestring budget, and they're just not going to have the money to spend in your establishment, period. So this whole reopen the economy thing is not all it's cracked up to be. But as I've said before, I think a lot of that was more a push to get things open so they don't have to spend money helping out small businesses or unemployment.
I'd rather let them fail.
Or right. They don't want to give people any more money. They don't want to help things out. I mean, the truth is, this thing never should have happened in the first place. And a lot of these businesses thought, because this is the way historically it's gone for the most part over the years, they thought that the government was going to help them. And the truth is, especially with the Orange King in office, he doesn't give a fuck about you. He does not care. And it's not just him. The Republicans, the Democrats, the whole system, they don't care about the common person. They're all so far in with corporate interests. Did they design this way? Not necessarily, but you know what? It was a nice side effect of this pandemic, and I don't think they're crying about it. But they want to reopen the economy so that they're off the hook. They don't have to pay extra stimulus checks or extra unemployment, because listen, they decide to open your job and you're collecting unemployment and you're high risk, you don't feel safe, whatever it is. If they open your job and you don't want to go because you're nervous about COVID, about getting sick, They don't give a fuck.
Yep.
That's job abandonment. That's job abandonment, and you're no longer eligible for unemployment.
Yep.
So tell me, based on that, do you think they really give a fuck about you? They don't.
No, absolutely not.
So all of this reopen the economy shit is all based on, well, if we get it reopened, then we don't have to pay these stimulus checks, and then maybe some of these people won't go to work, and we don't have to pay them unemployment. It's all part of that whole thing. And a lot of people, like I said, they think that this is going to be the solution, that once the economy reopens, that their job is going to be there and everything's going to be peachy and the money's going to come flowing back in and this and that. And that's not...
Keep talking. I'll be right there.
Okay. That's not at all what's going to happen. They're not going to make that money like they thought they would. And once they don't make that money, that's when the shit's going to start to hit the fan. Sorry. Once they're not making that money that they hope they would when this thing reopened, that's when the shit's really going to start to hit the fan.
Yep.
And
it's going to go.
Yeah, and they're just going to be stuck. They're going to have nowhere to go, nothing, no recourse, because that's the end. And listen, small business was already on life support
long before this even happened.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's plenty of malls. Look at how many big stores have gone out of business.
Almost.
And look at how many stores have been teetering. Like
most
shit.
of them are not going to make it. You are going to come back, and after Christmas, I'm saying right now, after Christmas, you are going to see that as soon as these leases are up, these stores are closing.
Right.
Whether they are going out of business or just going online, there will the idea of keeping a commercial space open will be for the very few.
Yeah, it's because it's become more and more difficult as rents increase, especially in certain places like New York City. Mm-hmm. I mean, we had that whole discussion last week about deregulation and the fact that, there's huge retail spaces in New York City that are just sitting empty.
Yep.
And
it's all coming to a head.
But look at all these other companies. I mean, I'm sure you've heard this a million times. How many years have we heard that Guitar Center is going to go out of business?
Well, they're holding on. They've been holding on by a shoestring.
Right.
And now they've been paying rent for what is 3 months on stores that are not able to bring in any money at all. Yeah. So they're subsisting purely on internet sales at this point. If you can't continue to pay these prices for locations that aren't making money, it's a total loss.
And they hope, that once things start to reopen, they're going to make some of this money back. But unless the government really steps in, which they don't want to do, you're going to have, it's not like it's not like they hit pause on everything, okay? Things have been closed for 3 months. It's not like you don't have to pay that 3 months rent.
No.
So now it's like, okay, you open up in June, you're behind the 8 ball for how many months rent?
Yep. No, that's...
You're not going to suddenly make that money.
That's why I kept paying my rent at my studio. Like, I didn't call my guy, and I wasn't like, hey, bro, let me defer these couple payments until we reopen. I was just like, nah, let me just go on and bite the bullet and pay now, because when I reopen, I'm going to be sitting at a point where I'm not owing anybody any money. I'm paying my rent, I'm paying my insurance, I'm paying my electric, etc. So, I cannot necessarily hit the ground running, because people are going to still be, trying not to get sick. So booking sessions, even though I'm dealing with hardcore kids, is still going to be tough.
Right.
But not everybody had that option.
Well, that's what I was going to say. At least you're in a position where you can do that. There's plenty of people that run small businesses. And listen, forget about even small businesses. There's people that just in their own home life
can't do that.
They, how many people lost their jobs? How many people are collecting unemployment? How many of those people, because same thing for just your regular average renter, they're behind the 8 ball for 3 months rent also.
And then they're gonna say you're gonna come back to your job or whatever job that you end up getting at the end of this, and they're gonna say, okay, that's all done with. Wipe their hands of it and say everything's turned back on, and you're not gonna. It's not like they're going to defer that and add it to the end.
Right.
They're gonna just be like, all right, so we just didn't ask you for the last 3 months, but you owe us X amount of money, and I need it now. And you're gonna be like, well, I worked for 2 weeks, and I got way more bills than this 2-week check can even possibly handle. So you're waiting, bro.
And then
they get evicted.
It's going to be that classic phrase that we've heard a million times before. Fuck you, pay me.
Yep.
Because that's what it's going to come down to. And listen, that's how it is, because, I mean, not every real estate owner is a big fucking mogul either. Like some of these people that own these spaces might be behind the 8 ball themselves.
Right, because
they've still got to pay property taxes and whatever else.
Yeah, their job is running these properties, and they got to make money off of you to pay their nut.
Right. So it's not necessarily just, big bad landlord. It's the idea that shit flows downstream.
If everybody got the same deferment, meaning everybody got pushed out 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is, tack it on at the end, then the landlords could also say, hey, tack it on at the end.
Right.
But they can't, because they got to pay too.
Yeah, and like we talked about last time, okay, yeah, you got a stimulus payment. Like, what fucking good is that thing? Like, you wipe your ass with that.
2 days, gone.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, in my life, the amount of times that I've spent $1,200 in a day is more often than I'd even like to talk about.
Oh, sure.
I mean, I'm lucky enough to be able to say that, because that means I've had the money to do it. But I guarantee you that other people have had those moments and they had to put it on a credit card.
Oh, for sure. If they had credit cards,
or they just went without, and they lived with a hole in their roof for 16 months until they could get the money, or whatever the case is. I've been lucky enough to, and I fully acknowledge that I'm lucky enough to have not had to deal with that, but it's not typical, and I know it.
Well, that's what I was going to say also. For me, it's not like I own my own business, but I'm lucky because with the job that I have now, everything is fine. I still have a job. I'm able to work from home. If I had had any of the jobs that I've had in the past, say, 10, 15 years, probably, maybe pushing 20 years, I would probably be fucked.
Right.
So I'm very lucky that I'm in the spot that I'm in right now, because honestly, it hit me a little bit just because there used to be overtime that I would do sometimes, and I wasn't making any of that overtime. It was just straight weeks. And, but it didn't kill me at all.
I mean, I have a friend.
I'm still in a good spot.
I have a friend who is in an industry that's basically shut down because it's part of in the medical field.
Yeah. And
he has not worked in 3 months. He owns a house. I don't think he's paid his rent in 3 months. All his bills, any money he has coming in goes to food and toilet paper, basically.
Right.
Like, gotta eat, gotta wipe your ass, and you gotta be able to drink something other than just the water out of your sink. But I mean, you could get down to just drinking the water out of your sink if you had to.
Right.
He's gonna come back and he'll probably be one of the last pieces of the industry brought back in, and he's going to be so far behind the 8 ball that he's going to be in trouble. He was already in trouble beforehand, but it's way worse now. Like, I truly feel bad for the people who are stuck.
Well, listen, let's tie it in again to something we talked about earlier. And if you have kids with this situation, you're way more fucked.
Oh.
Because I know people that have kids and lost their job, and they're struggling trying to figure out how they're going to feed their kids. Mm-hmm. And luckily, there's all these, they're doing all these food drives and all this other shit. So they're giving people food. There's people in my neighborhood that are actually just somehow they were able to work with a senior center, so they knew who the seniors were in the neighborhood, and they were just leaving things of food on their porch.
I mean, that's a solid thing to do,
right,
for people, but not everybody's going to get that. So that lookout.
Exactly. So if you're lucky, but once again, even if you're by yourself, there's plenty of people struggling. Once you add a family to that, there's plenty of people that are
just buried,
really, really in bad shape right now. And luckily, there's a lot of people doing a lot of hustling, trying to help people like that out, and that's really great. But this is how it is now, and it's not going to get any better for a while. Everybody thinks that we'll reopen the economy, and then everything is just going to be this big shining light.
Nope. It's not how it works.
There's plenty of industries too that aren't going to get back to normal anytime soon. Shit, look, if you do anything related to live music,
it's not going to even be close.
They got another year at least before they get anything back to the level, anything close to the level they were, say January of this year. Yeah,
I mean, they're talking like in Pittsburgh, the conversation was that you can't currently at a green state, at a green status, you can't have more than 250 people at any event indoors. If it was outdoors, it would be different. But,
right.
If you're talking about going to see a concert, and I'm talking about concerts, I'm not even talking about shows, I'm talking about concerts, and you're going to, Madison Square Garden, obviously you can't do Madison Square Garden with 250 people. It's just not happening. And that is a huge chunk of what Madison Square Garden does. Right. It's concerts.
Right, and if you take that and just work your way down the line with that, there's the people that work there's people who work security at the Garden, people that work the hot dog stands and the merch windows and all kinds of,
security, janitorial services, set up, so all the stagehands, like literally endless amount of people completely affected by this.
Yeah, you can really just extrapolate it, and that's an industry that's not getting back anytime soon. Even these industries that are opening, they're going to open slow.
Mm-hmm.
Say you run a restaurant and you've got five people as wait staff. If you open at 20% capacity, that's 1 out of your 5.
Right, and it's hard to run a restaurant with 1 wait staff. So You're going to end up spending more money to wait on less people, because they're, basically, like, if you're running a restaurant and you're telling me that you're coming back, you're probably going to have to run at 85% of what normal is to be able to efficiently run your restaurant. So the difference between 85 and 100% is minimal, but if you're only bringing in 20 to 50% of the actual bodies into the building, you are doomed. You're doomed.
Yeah, your profits are never going to equal.
You would be better off.
Anything close.
Especially if you're like a local pizza place or a place that's doing takeout right now, to continue doing the takeout.
Yeah.
Because that way you can keep your overhead as low as possible. You're paying less for electric, you're paying less for heating and air conditioning, and you're having less food staff on to prepare the food because you don't have to deal with both takeout and eat in.
Right.
So, and then obviously you're buying less food because you have to have less on hand to service just your takeout. But that trickles down, because then if you're buying less, that means that the people who are selling you food are selling you less, and they're losing money.
Their numbers are down.
And then the farmers are losing money because those people that are the purveyors are not purchasing, whether it's cattle to slaughter or whether it's grain to create whatever it is that needs to be created. I mean, it's not just one singular piece of this industry, it's the whole chain.
Yeah, it's crazy because over all this time, everything is really just integrated into each other all across this country, and this just shows how easy it is to just knock that house of cards down. Yep. And there are some places that are just never going to recover from this. Listen, talking about live music, like who knows how long it's going to be before things get back to normal, and there's going to be bands that aren't going to make it through this thing.
They're just not going to make it.
They're just not. They're just, they're just going to end up doing other stuff.
Yep.
And we talk about other industries, like me being a big pro wrestling fan. There's people who have been wrestling for years, and now they're not going to be able to work for the better part of a year. At least, who knows? They might end up just getting a different job and moving on from that industry because there's just nowhere for them to go.
There's no money to be made.
There's no money to be made. There's no way to recover. And it's just, this is just how it is. This is what it's become. And there's nothing that you can do, no matter how hard we try.
Yep.
It's just, this is the way it is. But, for all these people thinking that reopening the economy, quote unquote, is going to solve all these problems, it's only just begun.
I mean,
and who knows, especially with the way the election might go, we're still in the early stages of this whole thing, because things are, when we come out the other end of this thing, a lot of things are going to be very, very different.
And that's why I've always been talking about this 6-month window. I want, in the next 6 months, it will be very telling where we go as a country, because there is a lot of money flowing right now, but it's not flowing to the people.
No.
The stock market is back to not normal, but it's booming based on the drop that occurred in the wake of the coronavirus. I don't believe we've hit the numbers we were at previously, but we're climbing steadily back to where we were.
Right.
But that's Wall Street making money. That's big business making money. The people are making nothing.
No, and that's, a lot of people don't realize that either. Like all the talk about Wall Street and the stock market and stuff like that, most of that stuff doesn't affect most people, because in the end, that's not going to determine how many people are working.
And it has almost no effect on actually who is working.
Right.
Now, if we have a downturn in the amount of workers, it does affect Wall Street because it affects their valuation, but it has nothing to do with creating jobs.
Exactly. Get in touch with us. The Upgrade Podcast at gmail.com also is available, and the upgradepodcast.net will lead you to all of our little places all around the internet world. So definitely check that out and get in touch with us, and we can talk and maybe have some people on. Eventually, our goal is to have some guests on, some friends of ours, to discuss some different things as well. Yep, maybe some enemies.
Hey, whoever.
We've got plenty of those too.
I've got enough. Well, I'm Len Carmichael from Landmine Studio.
And where can they find you, Len?
Pretty much on Instagram or Facebook. Landmine Studios. Feel free to reach out if you want to yell at me. Hate all you want.
Nice. And I'm Gary Muttley. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram, just Gary Muttley. And you can find my band, the wonderful Billy Club Sandwich, on Facebook and Instagram as well. Talk to you guys soon.
This is an original instrumental.